pages of today's newspapers. And in the Daily Telegraph, Boris Johnson combines his jobs as journalist and politician, ramping up the pressure on Theresa May once again, declaring that the UK is preparing to take colonial rule from Brussels, betraying Leavers and Remainers alike. And Trevor Kavanagh in The Sun says the former Brexit Secretary Dominic Raab has pledged loyalty to Mrs May while karate kicking open the door to a leadership challenge. We can now see in The Guardian that their outside Westminster correspondent John Harris claims Brexit is a class betrayal and asks then why Labour is colluding in it. Max Hastings in The Times says the Conservatives have insisted on acquiring sole ownership of what he calls Brexit's stupendous deceits, costs and irrelevance, and the result could be a Corbyn government. In the Financial Times, Wolfgang Münchau says that he wouldn't bet against Theresa May, who's emerged as one of the most resilient figures in modern European politics. And it's clear that the financial markets aren't betting against her either, he says. Well, time to let the pros show how it's done, says Jacob Rees-Mogg in Morland's cartoon as he prepares to strap on a pair of wings and jump off the Brexit cliff. Jeremy Corbyn and Boris Johnson await their turn in similarly questionably airworthy contraptions. Magnificent men in their flying machines. Theresa May is drinking in the Last Chance Saloon in Ben Jennings' cartoon in The Guardian, but the bartender knows a Brexit gunfight seems only moments away. Well, joining me today to go through those are the chief leader writer at The Observer and former senior policy advisor to Ed Miliband, Sonia Sodha, and Sherelle Jacobs, assistant comment editor at the Daily Telegraph. Nice to see you both in harmony there, sharing it. Sharing an
We may not share views, but we share a bully.
Now, it has to be said, not much harmony in the Conservative Party at the moment. What do you make of Boris Johnson? He's finally come up with 6 proposals as what he says could be done. 6
proposals that completely don't make sense to me, Adam. So we've got Boris doing Boris, which is carping from the sidelines. He abdicated all responsibility, walked away from government months ago, even though he was the one who was sort of played a prominent role in the Leave campaign, selling Leave to the country. I think when he realised it was harder than he thought it was going to be, he just walked away from it. And now in this Telegraph column, he seems to be suggesting that we just forget about the Northern Ireland peace process, ditch the Good Friday Agreement, and instead, ditch the backstop that's being proposed by the EU. So for me, it's an incredibly irresponsible set of proposals. I think he's right that there's a lot that both Remainers and Leavers don't like about the withdrawal agreement, but I think that May has got to the only place that she essentially could get to, given that both sides in this negotiation want to protect the Northern Ireland peace process, and given that she said she wants to end free movement of people.
It is a bit, I'd like a unicorn and a pony for Christmas, please, isn't it, that kind?
Well, I think it's not just the Boris Johnson show anymore on the opposing Theresa May side of the camp. We have Dominic Raab actually first out of the stables here, potentially to be the successor and cultivating himself as the no-deal option. And Sajid Javid also quite fancies himself as the steady pair of hands that can steer Britain through no deal. So I think it's not just about talking about whether this deal could be renegotiated. I think we are coming to the point where it's either going to be no deal or it's going to be a second referendum.
You see, I'm completely puzzled by Trevor Kavanagh, a man of great astuteness, seeing Dominic Raab as a potential leadership challenger. I mean, surely this is a man who just had the job and by his own measure made a mess of it.
He's an excellent tactician in one way, because
he made a mess of it.
He took that job
by his own judgment,
with people telling him that it was a poisoned chalice and not to take it. But he was a nobody before then, let's not forget. And now he's got some ministerial experience in the cabinet, and he banks that he can psychologically distance himself from this deal for long enough that
I think that's
we come to the point where there's a leadership challenge.
I certainly won't be backing up. I actually think personally May be sticking around a lot longer than we think. I think there's a lot of chat from the sidelines from the Brexiteers who would like to mount a challenge, but let's face it, they haven't got their 48 letters yet by the sounds of things, and I think they are actually quite unlikely to get them, and they know that if they challenge Theresa May using 48 letters, they need to have a majority of MPs in the Tory party who will vote against her, and they're absolutely not there. They're not there.
But it doesn't change the fact that this deal does not have a hope in hell of getting through Parliament.
Wow.
And effectively that the Prime Minister does not have a majority in Parliament anymore.
Well, I mean, Wolfgang Munchau, who's a German who writes about British politics and, according to David Cameron, annoys Angela Merkel a great deal. He's been pretty shrewd on all of this all the way through. And what he's saying is, actually, look at the markets. The markets aren't that worried about no deal, but they still think Mrs May actually get it through in the end because it's the only logical alternative.
I think they're probably right not to be worried about no deal, actually, because I think although it's a default scenario, I think it's unlikely because I don't think Parliament will let that happen. There absolutely isn't a majority of MPs in Parliament. I'm less sure than him that we're going to see Theresa May's deal pass. There certainly isn't a majority for it in Parliament at the moment. I think what May is hoping that she will either extract a couple of minor things from the EU, maybe take it away, lose the first vote, come back to Parliament with a second vote sort of 3 or 4 weeks later. But I'm just not sure that's going to happen. I think the only way to end this gridlock is to have a referendum on the terms of exit.
I don't think so. There is this market idea that you can try and jam the deal through once, the markets will go crazy and she can have another go. I'm not too sure about that. At the end of the day, there's not a lot that Mrs May can do at this deal. The ink is already dry on this agreement. It's going to get rubber stamped on the 20th of November. There isn't much room for manoeuvre, and I think it's a question of when, and actually it's a question of how long the cabinet can last, because there might be some resignations this week.
Oh, well, that'll thrill us all. John Harris, well, I have to say, award-winning columnist, he makes the point, he says, look, this is a class issue, that it's basically, you know, he doesn't use the phrase, but upper-class twits like Boris and...
I think you put it excellently,
and Jacob Rees-Mogg and city slickers like Nigel Farage, who are pushing Brexit. Therefore, he says, surely Labour should be able to spot the class enemy and be on the side of getting the best possible deal to remain close to the EU.
He does, and he's absolutely right. And I think what John Harris does in his column, an excellent job of doing in his column, is really demolishing the inconsistencies in Labour's position. So Labour are saying the solution here is another general election. There's two problems with that. First of all, how are we going to get to a general election? It's very hard to see under the Fixed Term Parliaments Act Tory and DUP MPs voting for a general election. Secondly, Labour's position itself is incredibly, it's as inconsistent as Boris Johnson's almost. So they've got these 6 tests that they say that they are assessing any deal against. They both want they think they can get the exact same benefits as EU membership while getting fairer controls on migration. So Labour's position just doesn't make sense. And John Harris is right. Labour should be backing a people's vote.
But I mean, to go back to the question which the column addresses, which is lead voting areas being neglected, I think both sides have incredibly neglected the people who voted A, on immigration, and B, to rebel against a system which has ignored them for so long. The Brexiteers have not really made the argument for why their Thatcherite free trade dream helps people in those marginal leave voting.
Because it doesn't.
But similarly, Labour has not been good enough at proving why a second referendum and going back in the EU is in the interests of some of these manufacturing areas in the north, and they have a lot of work to do. Both sides have work to do, actually, and as the battle lines draw between no deal and second referendum, they will have to both start paying a bit more attention to these people.
Thank you both very much indeed. Splendid views there. The Prime Minister is going to address the CBI, the Confederation of British Industries annual conference in just under an hour's time. What do they think about what's on the agenda? Joining me now is their Deputy